one of the sort of central pillars, I guess, of everything that I teach is don't abdicate your authority. Now, that doesn't mean when you're not abdicating your authority means you're just not simply believing something simply because somebody says it. Doesn't mean you're sitting there in a cynical sense either, like holding yourself apart. But I think that what happens a lot of times in spirituality is people give their authority away, right? They just give it away because, oh, that person sounds like they know what they're talking about. And so I'll stop thinking for myself because they must know more than I do. And that's a critical mistake. That's a critical mistake, is we can't just give our authority away to anybody, no matter how clear or enlightened they is. That's because that's putting ourselves back in a position of like being an infant or a child. And it makes it really hard to discriminate. I've met a lot of people that have come to me from being with some, pretty damaging spiritual teachers. And I have yet to ask one of them, now, so you never, ever, ever, ever had an inkling that there was something just a little off here? I've never had a single person tell me, nope, I had no inkling whatsoever, ever for an instant. They usually, well, yeah, there was this little thing in the back of my mind that, was questioning or told me like, watch out or beware or whatever. And I just kind of didn't pay attention to it, because who am I? Like, that's what people tend to think. Who am I to make those judgments? I'm not enlightened. Well, it's your life, enlightened or not. You better make those judgments or someone's going to make them for you. And I don't think as adults, like, we don't want people making those judgments for us, whether they're spiritual teachers or anybody else for that matter. So I think a big part of it is I think if we're not caught up in the whole hype around spirituality, that we have to be able to get back to a kind of listening, right? And I have found that when people can get kind of connected with themselves and their intuition, and they're not caught up in a bunch of spiritual hype or someone's going to save me or I'm going to ride, to enlightenment on the coattails of this supremely enlightened being and all that kind of stuff. If we don't fall for that, because it's very alluring, but it's spiritual candy. You can't nourish yourself on candy forever. But if we're not involved in all that, then we at least in some manner are still here, connected with ourselves and connected with our sort of intuition. And our intuition really serves us well. The problem is most people don't grow up having real permission to listen to their own intuition, right? Their own innate sense of like, yeah, this person's seems on the mark, or they seem trustworthy, right? They seem to have my best interest at heart. And that's a kind of an intuitive thing you pick up on, but you can't pick up on it if you're not listening to yourself, or if you're waiting for someone to give you the permission to listen to yourself. So that's why I think of it as like the very first thing, or at least among the very first things, is to find that within us that we can trust. As a teacher, that's what I think is one of the really important things I try to help people with. What inside you can you trust right now? Because that ends up to be an invaluable guide in life. Yeah.
I love that advice. especially about not giving your authority, because sometimes you may make mistakes with your intuition,
Yeah, sometimes you do.
and until it's clear, it's better to not give away your own self power.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, because that's that, to establish a kind of uh, deeper relationship, that's earned, right? We trust somebody because they've shown themselves to be trustworthy, not just because we're like, oh, I just want to trust this person. I mean, real trust between human beings, it's something earned and it happens over time. And that's why, I think, of course, spirituality has so much sort of what I call magical thinking in it, because I understand why too, because human beings, we can be so desperate to feel good or better or free or whatever we want to feel. And there can often be a sort of desperation around that where we're willing to risk, you know, um, not taking the time to see if someone's trustworthy, if they have your own interest at at heart, and this is all part of not giving your own authority away. Um, it's I think in spirituality from day one, like we need to be. I'm not sure what the right word is, but like we have to go to that place where we're grown up, right? Where we're mature, where we're grown up, where we don't because often in spirituality people go into this very young place very quickly, right? They walk in the door and they revert to children. And sometimes are encouraged to do so, right? And but that's not healthy. Like if that's not a coherent path to awakening either. It's like we can't afford to revert back to children. It's much better if we, like for instance, the average person, let's say they go to college, right? And they go to a university. And they don't go to their university teacher and just fawn all over them and fall on the floor and kiss their feet, thinking their math teacher can save them from every bit of suffering in their life, right? There's like, okay, this guy or woman is here to help me learn math, right? And I know that spiritual teachers, we're cutting to a deeper place inside of people. But I think if we can relate to spiritual teachers more as useful mentors rather than gods, boy, would we be a lot better off. I mean, it wouldn't have all that projection stuff for a while, that for a little while can be fun, but in the long term, it ends up to not be so fun, you know. Um, but that depends on where we're at, right? Where each of us are at. If we unconsciously or unconsciously think someone's going to do this for me or has the power to do it for me, um, we're putting ourselves in a very sort of immature, weakened position. But if we know, like, no, nobody's going to do this for me. Hell, if somebody could do this for me, they would have already done it. Right? If I could do it for somebody, I'd just do it. Tap them on the forehead, they wake up, thanks, next. Like, but it doesn't actually happen that way. So, um, yeah, so the more maturely we can encounter, a teaching, a teacher, anybody for that matter, where we're not just giving our authority away, because that's the deal, right? If a spiritual teacher sort of assumes a false authority, that teacher needs a whole room full of people that are willing to give it away to them. It's a deal. It's a two-way street. You know what I mean? And so I think when we have to realize like we don't want to be part of that two-way street. We want to stay in our own authority while at the same time being open to some, useful guidance. Again, it's the same thing you do when you go to a biology teacher in college. Like hopefully you're not just giving everything away to the teacher, but you're open like, hey, this teacher probably knows something I don't know. They've been down this road farther than I have. So I'll be open to learning something, but they're not going to live my life for me. So